And welcome to the Square. Tonight is the second part series under the theme Kwibuka 25, and we're here to discuss how to handle trauma as a nation. We're going to look at initiatives that are in the country that are underway to help people who've been affected by trauma, people who are affected by the genocide against the Tutsi. My name is Dana Mpisi. I'm the host of the Square, and our guest for tonight, we're joined here by Professor Vincent Sezibera. Professor Sezibera is the chairperson of Rwanda Psychological Society. He's also the acting director at the University of Rwanda's Mental Health College, Medicine of Health Science. I hope I got it right. Yeah, Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us, Professor Vincent. As always, we are joined by the resident panelists on the show. I'm going to start with Charles Haber.
Hi,
Welcome
Dana.
back. We missed you last week.
I was away, but how are you? I was with you in spirit.
Exactly. Good to have you back. And on my extreme left, we have Brenna Namata. Great to have you on the show. As always, Ephraim, always a pleasure to have you.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Great. Yeah. As we always do before we kickstart things, we're just going to have a brief recap of the week thus far. And I know there's been burning issues we've been discussing just before the show started. Charles, I'll start with you, considering you weren't around last week.
I think maybe on the next show we should just spend the whole show talking about burning issues.
I know.
Exactly.
Yeah. One particular thing caught my attention for the right reason. And that is the issue around regulation of the taxi services. So RDB did release a communique to the effect that hotels and other places that run hospitality business in nature are strongly advised to...
Is it strongly advised?
No, I am borrowing strong words from another strong minister.
They have no choice in the matter.
Yes, you know, the same way was strongly advised not to go to Uganda. So the same way hotels and other hospitality centers are strongly advised not to use cabs that are not metered. I think it's a step in the right direction, considering the fact that taxi people, generally speaking, people in the public transport sector can be a bit of a nuisance and can want to take advantage of people. I have been a victim of this. Not too long ago, less than 2 months ago, I took a cab from Kigali Heights to M&M Plaza, and the guy had the audacity to charge me 5,000 francs. So I asked the guy, show me the meter. And he told me the meter was not charged or something. And then little did he know that a company I'm associated with is involved in the management of Kigali Heights. And then I asked him, no, every cab that parks at Kigali Heights is supposed to have a meter. So I took a picture of the car and sent it to their boss. And of course it caused him a bit of trouble, and he's probably not there anymore. But now I'm imagining how many people have they done that to. Yeah, so I think it's a step in the right direction. But however, that said, I think to a certain extent the forces of market demand and supply should be allowed to play. The high-handedness, for there to be a good reason to do it. I mean, I'm sure there are other very, very many good people. I'll take an example of Parkin. Not all the cabs, they have a contract with an association of cab drivers. Not all these cab drivers are required to have meters, but story for
I'm glad you gave the
yes.
caveat of that said, you'd rather let market forces of demand and supply play in, because personally I just think, you know, there's a bit of hyper-regulation in that sense, you know, and I think it's a bit elitist to you know, have that approach whereby, you know, all hotels and everything. If that guy did that to you, that's unfortunate, but I think the general population, I don't know, I'm not so sure about...
But the general population use cabs, that's another thing.
But
in itself, it's a luxury good.
Yeah. But I'm talking also in private sector as a business owner of taxis, and maybe you can't have yours metered.
No, you see, at least at the end of the day, none of us...
I know you're going to defend it.
No, look, I'm going to be very frank, right? At the end of the day, I'm not a cab owner, so I don't know what cab owners go through. But I feel like what I've seen just in general when it comes to tax compliance, and shout out to Rwanda Revenue I'm going to give them a shout out, but I've learned tax compliance significantly improves one's business significantly, because automatically when you start to put in tax compliance structures or systems, it automatically improves your own internal reporting systems and structures. So you find, even for a normal cab guy, he probably doesn't know, he probably knows how much he receives from each client coming in and out. But there's something that goes with knowing how much there's actually, what kind of return on investment exists on your labor. Because at some point, maybe he realizes that it's not as profitable as he thought.
I don't know. I think we'll have a show on this, really.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's
For me, I would
and it reminds me a bit of, I don't know if you know what's happening in Cuba with those old, like, sort of Havana taxes that are just being phased out by government sort of regulations and everything. And I think we need to have a discussion on it. I think it's a good concept, like you said, but I really wonder what the nuanced effects of this will play out on business owners.
No, but even the aspect of safety. Anyway, but we'll talk about this.
Brenna, very quickly.
I would like to take us back to Kwibuka 25,
yes.
The commemoration week. We saw a lot of genocide denial, revisionism online. And I think as a nation, we should expect it to get worse.
Really?
Yes, it will get worse over the years.
Why do you say that?
So the reason I say that is we've seen what has happened before elsewhere, and it's not going to be any different. But I think what is important as a nation is to be ready to counter and be very strong in terms of dealing with it. And how you deal with that is, one, strengthening SENER, IWUKA. At the moment, if you look at those agencies, they are not really well funded, and their capabilities are really still low. So over the years, I think for them to be able to deal with this challenge, they really need to be well-resourced to do more research, to do more work in confronting what awaits us. We've seen this year more genocide survivors telling their stories online. That has to go beyond Twitter, because Twitter is one place where we've seen many stories. We need to find a way how these stories can get on more popular social media, whether it's WhatsApp or Instagram. And then we also need to have more research around the genocide. It is not enough. And when we look at, currently it's dominated by Western scholars, and that's a problem. We need more Rwandans telling our stories, and it has to go beyond short videos, but really getting into these studies and becoming specialists. Currently I think the only person who has consistently, we have Tom Ndahiro. So we need many of those that can actually be empowered and credible on the international level.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I totally agree. So, Professor Vincent Sezibera, thank you for honoring our invitation. We are here to discuss trauma. We're here to discuss how trauma has affected thousands, hundreds and thousands of people, survivors, Rwandans, people who are affected by the genocide against the Tutsi. And I'll just start with a few statistics that I'd like to share to the panel as well as to you, Professor. So there was a study carried out, and I know you were part of it, that was released last year in December by the Ministry of Health in partnership with the National Commission for the Fight Against Genocide, CNLG. And research findings were that revealed that post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, amongst genocide survivors stands at 27.9%. You compared this to 3.6% of PTSD that affects the general population. And as a practitioner working in mental health, can you share with us countrywide initiatives to address this issue? And if you can also share a bit with us regarding the upcoming symposium in May regarding mental health.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to share some of the ideas and findings from the research and even the clinical practice. I will start by describing what trauma is. Talking about trauma, one, we can look at it from the psychiatry and psychopathology perspective, where individuals are affected and we keep displaying anxiety-related difficulties, like experiencing what they went through, which is also manifested through, I would say, disturbing behaviors like crying, isolating themselves, and also losing the sense of safety and security, which will in turn affect their occupational life and the way they see the world. They tend to be pessimistic and easily worried because of some kind of attention biases. They will tend to perceive and interpret each and everything in the anxiety manner. Also, while it's specific to the trauma in Rwanda, we have to also understand it from the social and psychosocial perspective. What do I mean by social and psychosocial perspective? As compared to other genocides, what happened to us was perpetrated by neighbors, people who used to be contributing or even interacting in daily life. Like a neighbor in Rwanda is like more than a friend. So understanding that the neighbor can become your killer, in fact, it affects even the way you interact with others, because the neighbor is no longer inspiring the sense of safety and security. So the last 25 years, one, I have to congratulate my country fellow men and women because of what we were able to put in place. Even the concept of trauma. In the past, we couldn't have in our language a concept that translates trauma and the post-traumatic stress disorder.
In Kinyarwanda, that concept
It did not
did not
exist.
exist before 1994.
No, it didn't.
Wow.
Because immediately after the genocide, with UNICEF and other international NGOs, they came and they started some programs, and they even started using the concept. And tentatively, we tried to borrow from the ancient Kinyarwanda some words like ihahamuka to mean the dysfunctioning behaviors. But no concept translates the inner mechanism and symptoms associated with the trauma, like emotional dysregulation. What you don't see, but which is active, even the coping mechanisms, like those who don't express their emotions, but inside they are very
burning.
active and burning, and through what is known as rumination. They keep ruminating. So I think we did a lot, we as a nation. When we look at what was done from the clinic perspective, now in the hospitals with the decentralization policy, at least in every hospital, you have psychiatrists in some hospitals, like district hospitals and referral hospitals. You have clinical psychologists working in these mental health units. You have mental health nurses and social workers in the hospital milieu. But also we have a number of programs that were initiated in the community, psychosocial programs, either educating and raising awareness around trauma-related difficulties, manifestations, but also mobilizing local resources to be in support to those who may experience and have trauma-related difficulties. The attitude, changing the attitude, to be able to support instead of rejecting and discriminating, fighting the stigma around trauma and globally mental disease. So I think a lot was done, either in the hospitals, but also in the policies and strategies like decentralization, to mean availing the mental related services, minimizing stigma, because if I'm going to the hospital, you don't ask me whether I'm going for any gynecobstetric or any internal or any, surgical intervention. I just say, I'm going to the hospital. Mm-hmm. So the one with mental difficulties was also, I think, encouraged to consult and get help in the hospital around it, which is different in the past. And I think sometimes today when you call someone and say, oh, where are you? And when you say, oh, I'm in Dera, say, oh, what happened? As if you can't be even visiting some friends.
That's very true. That's very, very
Or you're
true.
not buying a plot around there.
Exactly.
Or having a plot or any construction.
Yes,
Back to what you asked me. Yeah, we are going to have a symposium next month, May 8 to 9, and we called it Trauma Symposium, Managing Trauma from Grassroots Initiatives to Institutional Interventions. What we meant with this theme, one is to show that there should be continued efforts in managing trauma-related difficulties. But the theme is also recognizing what was started from scratch, like grassroots initiatives. But these grassroots initiatives have really inspired professional and institutional interventions. Like today now we have clinic-oriented, we have policies, and you even have those who are developing very interesting psychotherapies to manage professionally the trauma.
Can you just say something about psychotherapies? I find it very interesting. If you can shed some more light on what it entails.
When we look at the treatment in mental health, you may have medicalized treatment with medications and injections, but we do also have non-medicalized treatment known as psychotherapies. The psychotherapies, mostly you engage in a goal-oriented conversation with a trained professional, asking specific questions, like when you come to me and say, I'm depressed, I can ask, why do you think you are depressed? Or I can't do this, I'm stacking and I'm pessimistic, and then I will say, when did this start? I'm useless, and I'll start now digging into that perception, that conviction you have that you are useless. And you say, I failed my exam. And then I can ask you, yeah, it is unfortunate that you failed. Can you tell me in your life, what do you do plus your studies? Oh, I look at after my kids. How are your kids? Oh, they are very interesting. How successful do you think you are with your kids? Oh, I think I'm good at looking at my kids. Oh, so you are not really a failure because you just failed an exam, but you are also successful in, this conversation was oriented in changing that negative perception of oneself. So psychotherapy is this kind of non-medicalized treatment. Rather, it is a conversation which is oriented and has a purpose depending on the disorder you are bringing in a consultation.
I just want to ask, I think in theory it sounds good, but from a capacity perspective, do we really have psychotherapists and professionals who understand this and can actually walk as many people as they need to through this process? Do we have that kind of capacity across the country?
I will say yes. I will say yes because one, when you look at the move from the 90s to now, the numbers of professionals in Rwanda, numbers are really increasing. In the 90s, we only had one psychiatrist, but today we have about 12. A psychiatrist is someone who completed the general training in medicine, the MD doctor, general practitioners, like what we have in hospitals. In addition to that, he or she had 5 more years specializing in treating mental disorders, mental disease, using medications plus some trainings in psychotherapies. So we are now having like 12. And we have like 2,000 and more clinical psychologists with a bachelor's degree in clinical psychology. And clinical psychology, you have general training in psychology, behavior, plus disorders, which is psychopathology and psychiatry, and then the different approaches in psychotherapy, where you have like family and couple approach, you have the cognitive and behavior therapy. What I was explaining, in fact, referred to the cognitive and behavior approach, where you say you found that the way we behave is dictated by the way we think through the emotions we have or we experience from the thinking. So to change the dysfunctioning behavior, you have to change first my thinking, which will in turn will change my emotions. So there's clinical psychologists at the completion of the 4-year program, they have all the necessary to help. But we have also those who are doing, taking a master's in clinical psychology and therapeutics, which is a 2-year program in addition to the 4 years they completed. We have also a number of nurses with an orientation in mental health who also are doing a very interesting job.
The gap is narrowing.
Yeah, yes.
Then, I on a lighter note, I think I need a psychotherapist. That's what you said before. I need a psychotherapist to show me how to make more money. But back to Prof, something directly related to the commemoration of the genocide against the Tutsis that we're going through. And during this remembrance period, we've been going to different places, watching different clips. And last year I saw the same thing happening. I want to get your professional opinion, Prof, around the confessions that are coming out these days from convicts. And some of them that when you listen to them, you get a bit of rage. Some of them are very raw and uncut, and to the extent that you have somebody saying, I have been locked up for the last 25 years, this is what I did. But there is something that I have never told people, that the family of so-and-so is actually buried in this and this place, and yet that family has survivors in that audience that the guy is talking to. And obviously, it wouldn't be shocking that some of those families have moved on, or probably have not moved on, but their trauma and the way they are affected, they have managed it fairly well, probably partly because the number of clinical psychologists we have are many, or all these different programs. But my specific question, Prof, is from a professional perspective. Don't you think that such initiatives take people backwards? Don't you think they bury the already traumatized people? Don't you think they bury the already traumatized people?
They've taken 10 steps forward and 20 steps back.
Yes.
So to
and this is probably one of the first questions I've asked without having an opinion. I'm so confused about this, because I'm like, it's extremely important to have that information, because it has been missing in the society, and nobody has that information apart from that perpetrator. But at the same time, what is that information doing to this victim?
Don't you think, to a certain degree, and I know the professor will answer it, but don't you think to a certain degree, when you look at it from the perspective of a survivor, that it brings some sort of closure?
Probably yes. Probably yes. But again, as I said,
So, let me first continue with the symposium, which in fact will be answering some of the queries and questions you are asking. we are going to meet with all these partners and stakeholders who have been practicing and developing programs in the country handling and addressing the issue of trauma, from Ibuka, Avega, ARCT, Ruhuka, and others, to ask ourselves two main questions, or even three. What are the lessons learned from what we have been doing during the 25 years? What are the challenges and what are the new forms of trauma we are having now, or the ramifications of the trauma from the genocide? Among these programs that were developed, we have psychosocial programs with main focus on unit and reconciliation. Unit and reconciliation programs, I think, and I have some evidences that they were aiming at promoting, let me call it, a conducive environment that can inspire that sense of security and safety where survivors live. But also, there's reconciliation and unit programs. We're also aiming at encouraging perpetrators and their relatives to get out that silence and say something and engage in that reconciliation process and reunite with. So, if I starting from that, I think confession, it is not something that simply comes in a second. It should be the end line of a long process of realizing what the perpetrator had engaged in and regret, and then to engage in the confession. So, from my opinion, I'm also rejecting those who confess on behalf of others. The confession should come from the individual, not from a group like what I was also reading from the media and social media, from the Catholic leaders. The other thing, in some program and practices, I think you have to be trauma-informed. Trauma-informed in the preparation of these events. I will see appropriate if the one who will be disclosing that he or she did something wrong, killed, to not come and just talk about it. Rather, we should prepare either the victim to know that this information is going to be disclosed, and get the victim prepared to manage that information and the emotions associated with that. But also prepare even the perpetrator will be, yes, and to see how are you going to be sharing this information and make it helpful, rather than something that's going to be victimizing the. So personally, I will say, whenever we have such a case, we should hold on and perhaps have it even done in a private room with some people who will be facilitating even the conversation.
I like that you said that, if I might just weigh in, because I think we have to pick up the pace. There's a lot of meat on this topic. So, but just when you say that, does that happen? Because what we see is mostly in Kwibuka commemorative events across the country, this information is just released. It's not done in the setting that you're proposing. So is this something we're working toward as a country? Do you think we'll start hearing of confessions that are facilitated and people are protected? Because as it is right now, it's very raw, as Charles was alluding to.
Yeah, we have some cases, but on the other hand, I think we have other stories from different local NGOs who have been facilitating this exercise, and they were successful, and you could see that they are really helpful. The information is also important because the survivor who has been waiting for many years to know where the relatives are, The information is also helpful because it embraces the mourning process and the grieving process when they are able to proceed with these burial and rituals that accompany the...
Bernard?
Yeah.
I just feel that we are sort of asking him the wrong questions. He's a technician, policy issues. I wish we had a government official to respond to what is being done. And for me, the concern is, even when we talk about the survivors, but then the survivors are in a society that I feel most of the time doesn't understand them or pay attention to their needs. Why am I saying this? So far, if you listen to some of the testimonies and some of the books that have been published, when survivors talk about their experience and at what point they actually realized they had a problem and had to seek care, it is too late. And
What
then
do you
you
mean
have
too late?
Too late because they've been living with people who have no clue, and most of the time it will escalate to a level where there's a problem, let's say in a home, and then someone says, oh, you need help. Can we start thinking about not waiting for them to say, you need help, but for us as a society to know that we have to consciously know that we have people in our society that have this kind of history, and this is how you deal with them. So, because...
So you're saying, as a society, we should be proactive?
Yes, we
in our
have
facilitation
to. Yes.
of survivors of the genocide.
We have to be proactive, and the conversation, I think, has to go beyond just focusing on what the attention that the survivors need, because they do not live in a vacuum. They live amongst us. How do we deal with them? How do we relate with them in a way that minimizes, the trauma? That is one. And two, if you look at the currently most of the interventions within trauma, okay, you have the schools that are trying to build capacity, but most of the work is being done by NGOs, and I have a problem with that, because NGOs will remain relevant to the extent that the donor is willing to fund the program.
Not to the needs of the
not
people on the ground.
Yes, not to the needs, not to the needs. That's one. And then, as we know, donor interests shift over time. And yet we know this is an issue that is going to be with us for a very long time. So in my view, we need to see government agencies take this proactively. We cannot leave it to NGOs.
Absolutely.
I don't think it's sustainable.
Professor, do you have anything to comment to that? Because I'd like us to move to the next segment.
Yes, I think there is a need of continued education. Why am I saying this? The research you have been referring to, we also looked at how often do we Rwandans, go and seek help from professionals. We could see that about 60-something%, they know where to go. But only 5% we go and seek help.
Yes.
So how do we encourage our fellows to seek help instead of saying, oh, this is the way I am? When you say, oh, I feel bad, what do you mean by I feel bad? And then what are you going to do? This is why I'm saying we need continued efforts in educating and raising awareness
and breaking the stigma around mental health, which is also in the part of the program. Now, while we're talking about genocide survivors who, of course, you all know, are predominantly affected by the genocide against the Tutsi, we also do not live in a vacuum. You also have children of perpetrators who face trauma. I don't think, I won't say in equal parts, but they have a level of trauma that they have gone through. Actually, I was in church on Saturday, and the pastor said something very interesting. He said, these perpetrators, while they were killing Tutsi, they might not know it, but they actually killed the spirit of their children. Imagine if you're a child watching your parents in, an organized machete spree, so they're also affected by trauma. So as a practitioner in this field, how are we navigating between the two? Children of perpetrators vis-a-vis genocide survivors?
Yeah, I think we have been talking about transmission of trauma. And when we talk about transmission of trauma, we normally look at how survivors' offspring can also display the same symptoms like their parents. But we do also forget that even perpetrators, they can transmit some sort of trauma, which is somewhat different in content.
But before we get to the transmission of trauma, which is the next part, my question was specifically children who are already born, not, in vitro, so to speak, but, a 10-year-old at that time, growing up having witnessed that, growing up knowing, majority of your family is probably behind bars in prison, growing up with that stigma. There's a level of trauma that we know that they also go through.
Sure.
So young people, between... as they say, until 30, from 15, I think, till 30, who witnessed the genocide, who were born into it. But how do we navigate when it comes to trauma?
Yeah.
Helping for these groups as well?
Even the numbers we have in the general population are not limited to survivors. If you are saying that in the general population, we have a 3.6% of those who are presenting with post-traumatic related difficulties, to mean even perpetrators and their kids are also considered in these statistics. But what I also want to mean is, what is the content of this kind of trauma-related difficulties? In survivors, you will see that the trauma-related difficulties are merely associated with the threat of dying, the distress associated with the loss. When you hear from the perpetrators, they have this kind of irrational thinking, as if one day there will be a kind of revenge, which is irrational because there are clear indicators that there is no room for revenge from any survivor. There are clear indicators. But you will see also that there's perpetrators' offspring, those who were 10 years during the genocide. They were also seeing what their daddies and mummies were doing. To mean there's pictures of violence, there's tragedy, and to be affected by these violence-related episodes. You can also notice a number of shame and guilt-oriented distress in these younger adolescents and offspring from perpetrators.
Yes.
So to confirm that in both groups, survivors, children and perpetrators, you have PTSD-related symptoms, but clinically the content might be different.
It'll be different.
Yeah.
So while in that vein, I'll take you back to what we talked about, intergenerational trauma. And apparently studies have shown that, that children of trauma survivors can actually inherit that in their DNA. Can you shed some more light on this? And is this something that's happening in Rwanda? And are we talking enough about this?
Yeah, at least this year during the commemoration, I could hear from different presentations and even shows in the media being interested in the next generation with some sort of optimism, but on the other side you have some pessimistic views, to mean those who are traumatized or those who experienced the genocide will also have offspring or children who are also traumatized. Somehow yes and no. Yes and no because we have the human malleability, if I can say that. We don't only display pathological things, but we have inner energy to be resilient. And you didn't ask me at the start of this show what was interesting for me the last week. Yeah. Let me share with you what was interesting. Yeah. I attended a seminar, and there is a colleague who presented his findings from the research and could show us that not only we transmit vulnerability to many trauma, but we do also transmit resilience. In addition to that, we don't have only intergenerational transmission of trauma, but we do also have intergenerational creativity. To mean, children are able to create something new, not necessarily pathological, but resilience-oriented.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, and I was very excited to hear that there is intergenerational creativity. So it is sending really a positive and optimistic message to us. So we don't have to be worried and expect our children to display only trauma-related difficulties with regard the genetic and bio-explanation of the transmission. In fact, from what I can read from colleagues in biology and genetics, there is no specific gene transmitting the post-traumatic stress disorder. You don't have it in the literature. The chronic PTSD doesn't affect the DNA sequencing or structure. Rather, what is clear from the biogenetic model, it is how the chronic PTSD affect what is known as epigenetic mechanisms, the way the genetic information is expressed. And exactly what is it? There is a kind of pathway. What is transmitted is how some axes in the DNA are affected, like the hypothalamus and the pituitary axis, which is responsible in the emotional regulation. The alteration at that HPA axis will affect the metabolic system, the neuroandro, or even hormonal functioning, which will make the child
So
to
in
be...
simple terms,
Yes.
it means
In fact,
that
they
when Bana is
inherit-
annoyed,
Yeah.
she's likely to throw a bottle at
Can
him.
I say simply that what they inherit is
Yes.
the vulnerability and the vulnerability and not being able to manage
Their
stress, yes,
Stressful
through
situations.
hormonal channel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's throwing a bottle. Well, I don't know if you heard that.
The good professor had sunk into his comfort zone.
We had really started.
He had sunk into his
But
comfort
it was very
zone and-
interesting.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
Very
actually.
nice.
But it is very simple. Let me say, when you
I like
perceive
the way you
something,
simplified it.
when you perceive any situation, there's a way you interpret it.
Yeah.
And there is a way the interpretation will lead to some kind of emotions.
Yes.
And you have the capacity to manage. So, to manage these emotions. So what is affected, it is that capacity of managing emotions and the stress response. The vulnerability.
That's
Explains that.
That's what's
explain
passed
why-
on. Yes.
And now, is there, considering that this is passed on genetically, is there a way it can be addressed without it necessarily being something that's innate? Because we're now talking about genetics to a certain degree.
Yep.
The question is it something that can be addressed, or is it something that we just have
I
to
think
say?
that's what he's essentially saying.
Yeah.
I will also say that that genetic predisposition is not enough. You have also to consider environmental factors,
Absolutely.
which will be considered as precipitating factors. Now, can this something to be addressed? Yes, of course. Because if the parents during even pregnancy is helped and educated on the way to manage the distressful situations, it will minimize in that predisposition and the child will be safe. And after about how do we assist the offspring from the affected parents?
I'd like to take us to our social media feed, if you will, and we have quite a number of tweets on this topic because I think it really
It's a very
touches.
interesting one, yes.
It touches on a lot of people. So our first tweet we have tonight is here, and this tweet is from Rama Isibo, who says that. So first of all, he starts with the statistics we gave. 27.9% of genocide survivors face trauma or PTSD. So Rama starts by saying he thinks it's too low because some are stoic or in denial. Even babies born today have the trauma passed on. Babies can have memories transferred to them in the womb. Some studies say this is just what we're talking about. His next tweet, before we go to our other tweet, is to do with, I believe our inability to deal with trauma is what is holding us back, not residual hatred. And he says we need to deal with the trauma of survivors. Only then can we deal with the wider trauma in society. Many survivors cannot face their families' killers, let alone forgive them because of trauma. And I think this is what we've been talking about, on the square. And then we have another tweet that's come in from Karera Rahema. And Rahema says that, I think Brenna's saying, and she's alluding to what you said in the beginning, I think Brenna's saying revisionism and genocide ideology will get worse is not right. With the laws and penalties strengthened, we should expect the genocide ideology to be reduced going forward. Before we go to our next tweet, can you...
I was specific. Denial and revisionism. And most of it, what we've seen over the last 7 days or so, it's coming from outside.
That's what I was about to say, yeah.
It's
external.
It's external.
Yes.
It's
So you meant externally.
Yeah,
Yes.
not
So I think she
Yes.
misunderstood and thought you meant internally.
Yeah. So
Out of
internally,
Rwanda.
yes, we have the laws, but
Yes.
how are you going to deal with what is coming from outside?
External.
Yeah. And
Okay.
we have increasingly many opportunists who are taking advantage of this.
Of that external.
Unfortunately, it includes survivors outside this country. That is quite unfortunate.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what is interesting is also outside you are now having countries and governments putting in place laws to fight.
Exactly.
Exactly. More collaboration.
Yes, more collaboration.
Which is very comforting. Our next tweet is from Isabel, and Isabel says that, what a coincidence. I have been wondering how professionals manage to handle post-genocide trauma of survivors and how equipped they were doing in so considering the uniqueness of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. I'm learning a lot from the professor. So thank you once again for coming on the show and dropping
Extremely educative.
gems of wisdom.
Yes.
Because it's something we really, like Brenna said, there's not a lot of research, number one, and there's not a lot of research being disseminated on trauma. We have our next tweet, and our next tweet here is from Omar, and Omar says that great and useful discussion now on RB Rwanda on fixing societal mental health issues. Maybe a technical question on psychological needs of communities within our society could help more. So I think Omar is saying that our communities might need more in terms of, how did you understand that question?
He basically, I think from the way I read it is that when you now talk of on the ground, and we now talk about the technical aspects of dealing with this trauma on the ground, when we now talk about the districts and the different health centers, what does that look like, at least from a technical perspective?
And more to that, just to say that scaling up the efforts, because it takes a long time to train professionals. So in the medium term, in the short term, how we're dealing with it, and this is where we, I think, have to replicate what we've done in maternal health, creating, empowering nurses, and people who would deal with these people on a regular basis.
And creating such, absolutely, and I feel that in terms of maternal health, even malaria, but to a certain degree, there was a sort of domino effect that spread in communities. If we could have the same strategy applied to handling trauma of people affected.
I just wanted to make a comment around that last tweet, and Professor alluded to something around the environment within which people with cases of trauma live, and I think the point the professor was raising is that might affect how quickly or how you manage your trauma. I belong to a group, a social gathering, when we call ourselves Igikorwa Churukundo. Now, the people who...
Is this a real group or WhatsApp group?
It's a real group.
It might be a virtual group.
No, for the last 4 years or so, we pick an average of 2 or 3 extremely vulnerable people here and support them in different ways. Now, they have... almost all of them have one thing in common, is that they've been affected by the genocide against the Tutsi in one way or another. Now, however, all of them have a totally different thing in common, is that they complain, or you find them in a situation of isolation. And that isolation actually deteriorates them way further than what people who have suffered in equal measure are. For instance, there's these two sisters from somewhere in the western province, a place called Jitwe, close to Buhanda.
Yeah, it's kind of my
yes,
home
that we shall be doing this year.
Yes.
And these girls, despite the fact that they're probably a little bit blessed as far as Ibuka is concerned, because they have a small piece of land and and 2 malnourished cows, but they suffer from one thing. Nobody cares about them. They've been totally abandoned. And that Prof's point earlier on around the environment within which you live can do you a lot of injustice. And it's probably a wake-up call to some of us that let's not take life for granted, that you can even help somebody by just speaking to them or by uplifting their spirits in one way or another, in whatever way you can. I think it's,
I'd like, thank you, absolutely, Charles, I agree with you. And it takes our duty to do more for people who are going through hardships, who have been through these incidences. I'd like us to close with something to do with how do we end the stigma on mental health. And just very quickly, these figures, actually, I found them a bit astonishing. And yet they represent the 5% of people who actually have issues and go for mental health treatment, like you said, Professor. And figures from Dera Neuropsychiatric Hospital in 2017 said that, released figures that said 62,551 cases, almost 62,500 cases were registered in 2017, and this remains the range every year. And the top 3 illnesses of people who are going for treatment included psychosis, epilepsy, and bipolar disorders, 2 of them which are a result of trauma. That said, if we could just have closing remarks from everyone on the panel, but just very quickly, because I think we have 2 minutes left before we give the closing remarks to the professor. How do you think we can break the stigma on mental health? This is a figure that was released in 2017, and the numbers keep on staying like that and growing. But as the doctor said, it just represents 5% of the general population who seek help knowing they have an issue. Ben, I'll start with you.
I think it starts with yourself, what you can do within your space, wherever you are. I think it has to be a conscious, deliberate effort as a society, wherever you are. Can you make a difference? Because we spend a lot of time pointing out what so-and-so can do, but what are you doing? I think it's at that point that we'll sort of have an answer around this issue. Otherwise, nobody can just afford to make an intervention that will be sufficient.
I think she mentioned an element of resources and empowering some of these institutions. I think a simple campaign of "It's okay not to be okay."
I like that.
Yeah, just simple. Obviously, put it in vernac, but it's okay not to be okay, and get people to understand that it's important to deal with this stuff. Like it affects your life and can affect the life of your children in many ways.
Thank you.
Along those lines, you see, some of these things also have to be driven by policy. For a very long time, it was not okay for you to say you are suffering from HIV/AIDS. For a very long time, it was not okay for buildings to provide for passages of people living with disabilities, and so on and so forth. But it took a deliberate government initiative to say, let's acknowledge that we are living with people who are different, and they are all our people. The same thing applies with mental health. We have to be extremely deliberate about these things. We have seen extremely senior people in society suffer from stress and stress-related issues, and it affects them negatively. We are all probably guilty or ashamed of saying that you have this cousin, that uncle, that grandmother, that auntie who has a mental problem. We will hide it, and we don't want to say anything about it. So,
let's be deliberate.
Yes, it's not going to come from us. But the moment the public authority or the policymakers come up and say, as Ephraim said, it's okay not to be okay, and they walk the talk, we shall follow suit.
We shall follow suit. Thank you very much, Professor. Last words from you, briefly. We have very little time left on how we can address the stigma around mental health in Rwanda.
I would say globally, we have to continue the raising awareness around mental health, including ending stigma and also the psychotrauma. We have to be able to continue educating the population. My other recommendation will be trauma-informed practices and policies and strategies, because we have to face this for many years to come, so we can't forget it as a public health issue. The other thing, it is an invitation. I think we have to use the resources we already have in the country. As I said, we have almost 2,000 trained clinical psychologists. I think you have to use those resources we already have in the country instead of continuing working as if we don't have the resources. Yeah. My last is an invitation. Kindly attend our trauma symposium, May 8, 9 at Marriott Hotel.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us. Please keep the conversation going using our hashtag on Twitter, @TheSquareRW. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee. Everything is still and always made in Rwanda. Thank you for joining us, and have a good night.